The following is a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
From the birthplace of modern winemaking, Sonoma, California, welcome to The Winemakers. Local experts Sam Couturi, Bart Hansen, and Brian Casey, along with host John Myers, invite you to listen in as they discuss all facets of winemaking. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and let's hear what the guys have to say this week.
Been my strategy all along. If a friend of mine's being a jackass at a dinner party, I'm like, let's just
lean in.
you know,
Lean in.
I go further.
Yeah.
I like make a point.
That's just how I act all the time. There's nobody else there.
Did you actually get that pour? You didn't get anything.
It's like a bad version of being protective, you know, like where I make myself the jackass.
I definitely just poured wine onto
the mic.
microphone.
Yeah.
That's perfect. I mean, that sounds great.
This is the greatest cold open ever.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Winemakers Podcast, apparently, for what it's worth.
Does it smell like microphone?
No, it's fine. Split second, I was like, is that corked? It's not.
Well,
Is the microphone corked?
I guess not.
Is the mic?
It's Zin.
It's Zin. It's head trained Zinfandel, just like the first vines of California. It is a head trained microphone stand. The Winemakers Podcast. We're here. This is episode 360 something, and I'm flying solo-ish today. We have special guest host James Joyner behind the board and camera, and saying hi to his mom, and esteemed guest Elaine Chukan Brown. It's been a while since we've had a recorded conversation.
Yeah, at least a week.
Yeah, something like that. You know, we talk often, and I've been, I guess, according to the acknowledgments, a sort of a sounding board, or at least a place of comic relief in writing this incredible book of yours that lands very soon.
Yes, very soon. So I think the official release date is April 14th, but it'll start getting shipped out in March, which I guess it turns out is now.
Yeah.
So,
Good omen, April 14th is my mother's 70th birthday.
fantastic.
There we go. We already got a shout out to mom, whose name can't remember.
Cindy.
Would
love some more Zinfandel. By the way.
Cindy loves Zinfandel. I bet you Cindy would love this book too.
She probably would, yeah.
Maybe. All right. So I, for the first time in the history of 362 episodes, did a little background research and tried to do my best to read the book last night.
Well,
it felt like college.
No, I get it.
It
I
felt
totally
like
get it. I
college.
honestly didn't expect y'all to ever read it, but I'm flattered.
And so I took some. My brother's calling me. My brother is the one who always interrupts to ask about where we store the moguls in the summertime. And I told him that I was going to be on the show with somebody from Alaska, and that they'd probably be a bit of a snow expert. So if you have any insight on that, as this works through,
Well, I wore my
spring parka.
Forget, in Alaska, spring parkas are because there's still snow.
Right? Are you? If you were in Alaska, you wouldn't be wearing that.
No, I'd have my winter.
Okay.
Yeah.
On March, whatever today is.
Yeah.
So before we just tell us where the inspiration for the book came from before we dive into it. And I mean, I think it's a super important take on the history of California wine. I also think, and this is my headline, I think it's a love letter to California wine. I think in the way that it's just like brutally honest, but also really in admiration of what California wine has done. So kind of before we dive into some of the nitty gritty, let's talk about sort of your 100,000 foot view as this concept came to life.
I actually really appreciate you saying that because, you know, like you said, I'm very honest in the book about the reality of how California came to be and how it progressed and how we got here and what we're facing going forward. And the thing is, sometimes we're not used to all the honest, hard parts coming up in the midst of a love letter. But that really was the thing. My hope is that by the end of the book, there's this honest look at what challenges we faced, because the lesson is we have faced so many challenges, and we're facing challenges now, but it's every single time through the history of California, including recently, it's those challenges have been faced by some people that care, take a pause to assess the situation, come together and problem solve and find a way forward. And that ultimately is what the book's about.
That was especially, the first section of the first part that I was able to read more closely before the CBD started kicking in last night. The parallels from, the beginnings of California wine history and to now, and sort of how the cycles both of environmental pressures, political pressures, for a much too diplomatic term, on the industry kind of come up again and again.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was interesting for me was I was seeing recent cycles repeating right now. Right. And I was like, boy, I really feel like this is these cycles, labor shortages are a perpetual problem in the wine industry. When you dig into the history, you realize some portion of that we're doing to ourselves. But then what does that mean we can do to help alleviate it? Right. Versus I think the conversation around the question of labor shortages tends to be addressed by blaming other people or a system somewhere else or things like that. And part of the point is, if we look at, how have the labor shortages gone historically? It turns out it's like a 10 to 20 year cycle that we repeat since the mid-1800s. And so if that's true, there must be something local going on, not just something out there that's changed. So what would that local thing be and how can we address it? So labor is not the only thing I'm looking at. It just happens to come up in the book. But I'm bringing that as an example to agree with you that going further into the history myself, I was realizing, oh my God, we just keep doing these things over and over. What does that mean we can learn from looking at that to apply now?
One of the things that, I don't know, I won't take credit for it, but in dealing with current immigration issues and who the target of those immigration laws and actions seem to be, that essentially, and not even essentially, we are still dealing with Europeans and indigenous people. And so that, and I want to dig in right to the beginning of the book of like California wine being grown and made by the indigenous peoples of California. And today, well, it's, maybe people from different geographic origins on this continent, the Mexican workforce in wine country are indigenous people to this continent, right? So there's this, just like that was the thing that, like, as going through the labor movement stuff in the 60s, and it's a story of people of color, and particularly indigenous people of color, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it occurs to me that I should explain what the book even is.
What's this book?
So it's
who are you and what is your book? How did you get here?
So
this is not my house. Brown. This is not my beautiful wife.
So I'm Elaine Chukan Brown, but the book is simply called Wines of California. It's part of
which is an undersell, by the way.
But it's part of an imprint, Classic Wines Library, that has wines of Loire, wines of Tuscany, wines of northern Spain, like all, and so this is part of that series, Wines of California. It's published by Académie du Vin, which is out of London, but I had to put a lot of thought into why write a book about California wine now. I do want to return to the point you were just making, though. But why write a book about California wine now? And it's, California is ostensibly the most searchable wine region in the world, right? Like, we're in Tech Haven. We're good at making websites. You can find a lot of it online.
Our Wikipedias are strong.
Yes, our Wikipedia is strong. But also, so much stuff got filmed and put online during the pandemic, and now that's there too. So why write a book now? And I was like, okay, well, one reason is that it would all be compiled in one place. Okay, cool. Is that good enough reason? And I was like, well, not really. So the next answer for me was, well, it has to be a book that compiles the needed information, but also gives perspective on it in a way you can't just look up on Wikipedia. And so the book is set in 3 sections. The first that we're talking about right now is like how we got here. So the history of California wine, beginning with New Spain coming in and expanding up the coast, and then all the way to this year, actually, 2025. And then the middle section gets into the regions of California, tries to bring some stories that are less talked about while also including all the obvious stuff like elevation and when the AVA was formed, and then the last section is what we're facing. And so that takes a look at some of the challenges that we're in now and where we might be going with them, but also how we can address them based on the lessons we've learned in the history of wine.
To say that I've read a lot of wine books is probably a little bit of a misstatement. I've skimmed a lot of wine books in my life. I don't think I've come across a wine book that is as sort of frank. And also, I mean, I said I felt like college in a lot of ways. Because you have a professorial manner. That is your
I've tried so hard to change it.
I would say I've read a lot of wine books, especially in the past couple of years, trying to get up to speed in this world that I've thrown myself in the middle of. And one thing that I really appreciate about this is the readability and approachability, but also the lack of it being a revisionist history or trying to take what is out there and bend it to a story that you want it to fit. It feels very factual. And I think going back to you saying it's a love letter, I don't think you can actually love something unless you love it for what it is. Otherwise you're loving your version of something, and that's not a real love, right? So I think that this being a love letter, I think it's really moving because you clearly love all of it, warts and all, and that makes your hopes for it in the long run that much more poignant.
Well, thank you. No, thank you. I mean, earlier you asked kind of what the inspiration was, and we're in this challenging time right now where I think there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of trying to talk about it as if we're facing it while avoiding it at the same time. And forgive me, I used to be a philosophy professor, but going into...
Is that something you can ever not be anymore?
No, that's what I'm saying. I've tried so hard. but it's I always say, it's like being an alcoholic. I have to recover one day at a time from philosophy. So so my name is Elaine Brown. I'm a recovering philosopher. Forgive me.
Seems like more of a strength than a weakness.
Well, that's kind of you. But anyway, if you go as early as you can in ancient Greek philosophy, you hit the Stoics. And one of their primary tenets was to find solutions to be able to embrace what's around you and improve it and also welcome it more clearly. You have to see what it is. You have to be honest about what it is. And again, we're in this time where a lot of people are scared about the business of wine, the ongoing growing conditions of wine, if we'll have labor, all these things. And so if the Stoics were right, and we want California wine to succeed and to keep going and to be this community we've built, we have to look at what it is honestly, because again, that's where we can find our deeper love for it, as James was saying, but also from that deeper love, the strength to find solutions. Yeah. And so anyway, going back to your other question, though, about the indigenous communities, it was, I'm indigenous to Alaska. I'm not indigenous to California.
Phenomenally indigenous, I've seen.
Indigenous, yeah. But interestingly, the first vinifera planted in what's now California was or in Northern California, rather, was brought here by Russians, who actually were brought here by the indigenous people of Alaska, including my people. And so we've been... And
that's like Fort Ross or something?
Yeah, exactly. So the first Russian settlements were along what's now the Sonoma Marin coast. Right. And so that's the origin of Fort Ross and also the name of the Russian River, Fort Ross, Fort Roos. Right. And so Russia had settled on the southern coast of Alaska, and then actually realized, oh crap, to keep our people going, we need more food. They weren't used to the muktuk and walrus that all of us were eating. And so they decided to venture down the coast and make settlements in warmer areas where they could grow resources, then bring them back north. So the Russians settled here on the Sonoma coast and Marin coast, and that actually helped spur Spain and Mexico coming up as far as they did. They were trying to keep
the Russians
from going further south.
Right.
But
it's another ongoing theme.
Yeah. So again, to your question about indigenous peoples, I'm not indigenous to California, but writing that first history chapter about, the first viticulturists of California, the indigenous, was still really poignant and at times painful for me. And then it turned out, as you were pointing out, as I came into writing the third chapter, which was about the labor movement, the farm worker labor movement in the 1960s, like realizing it was basically the same themes, different details all over again.
Right.
Like you're saying.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about those early vineyards of California, because I found, somebody who loves old head trained vines, that was the first thing that I highlighted was that it was the Spanish farming methods, and that they basically did it because they didn't want to bring in trellis materials. I always thought that trellises were like this modern thing, right?
No, I know, I did too. And I mean, I don't know the shape of the trellises that would have been available to them, but if you look at the text that was brought by the missionaries from Spain so that they could figure out how to grow vines here, there were multiple training options. So, but if you're in an entirely new place and you have to carry your supplies in yourself, you're not going to bring extra rope, and stuff like that. And so the easiest thing to do was to head train. And so there were only ever a few Franciscan missionaries here in what's now the state, and we credit them for growing the first wine and things like that. And they did guide some things, but it was the indigenous people that they taught how to head train, that then learned how to do it in this environment and how to keep the vines going and how to make the wine and recognize when it's ripe. And all of the steps were done by indigenous people that for the first 100 years of California wine, it was indigenous laborers. And I really think because of that, they deserve to be called viticulturists. They were not just laboring, they were problem solving, and that's what viticulturists do.
I mean, I think for me, having grown up among, Mexican vineyard workers, I believe that there is intrinsic knowledge of how to grow things, especially grow things on this continent, that people have. And, you didn't speculate about this in the book. It's actually very not speculative, your book. But there had to have been things that those people knew about how to plants survive in Northern California or Temecula or San Juan Capistrano that the Franciscans had no idea. And I'm wondering, do we know of, or did you come across any, again, speculation about the way that the indigenous people were adjusting what they were learning from the monks to actually make these vineyards survive? And then particularly as it comes into the more commercial side and gets out of the mission system.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is that indigenous people were not writing their own history at this point, right? So it's all found through the lens of sometimes what the missionaries are recording, and sometimes, once the communities expand, what's in the newspapers and letters that people are writing to each other. So some of the early history is actually like Junipero Serra writing to one of the monks in what's now Mexico, right, because they need supplies here. So you have to sort of interpret through those things. So I can't make specific claims about vineyards and how they were translating that, but what we do know is that it was the trade trails. So tribal groups had extensive trade
Right.
all through what's now California, all the way into even as far as New Mexico and Nevada and north. And those trails were really what helped the Spanish to come in and settle California, ironically enough. It'd be, like the pathways, the local knowledge of how to get around and how to find food is what saved the first Spanish newcomers. And so the indigenous people were translating their foodways to the newcomers. Right. But then also once it came time to actually grow vines, which wasn't until more than 10 years after Spain first came into California, the indigenous people were the ones that figured out how to get water to the vineyards and, how to plant them in a way that they could, evenly enough access the water. And so in structural sense, we do know that it was thanks to them.
It was them. Well, let me find more. I took all kinds of notes. Trellising. Let's see what else I got. Oh, so this fucking blew my mind. The whole stereotype of the quote unquote drunken Indian starts in California and starts in keeping the native people
in servitude.
Right?
Yeah, it was a way.
And this is once it's in the commercial system more than.
So Spain didn't allow commercial activities in what's now California. When Mexico wins the War for Independence and takes what's now California, they realize the only way they're going to survive is if they have more people. So again, ironically enough, you need people to do work, right, for a region to actually operate, right? Because you need people to grow food and transport things, right, and find water. And so it turns out they needed to bring in immigrants to what's now California in order to survive in their independence. And so Mexico was the first to open free trade in this area. And so also they invited people to become citizens if they would stay and start a business and do trade. And so Mexico actually also made indigenous people citizens. And then when gold was found and the U.S. made California a state, they disavowed that citizenship and needed laborers. And the indigenous people had already been, in servitude. And so to maintain that, this kind of loophole was made where if an indigenous person was caught drunk, they could then be taken by the state and then sold at auction for labor to repay their drunkenness, essentially. And so it turned into this trick where people that needed laborers would give indigenous peoples alcohol because indigenous were not allowed in bars. There was massive segregation between indigenous peoples and non-indigenous peoples in the United States until the 50s or 60s, 1950s or 60s. So indigenous people were not allowed in drinking establishments, but landowners would give them alcohol, and then once they were drunk, even if it might have been temporary, they would get them arrested, and then they could get free labor.
This is true everywhere too. I'm part Native, and my grandmother's family wound up fleeing to Canada because this would happen in Maine on the potato farms.
Yeah, it was like California's first legislative act was to create this Indian Indentured Servant Act that we're talking about. Right. But it was it became a national phenomenon. That's how the United States dealt.
Yeah, I remember being surprised to learn about it because everyone, you growing up in New England, you learn that we're the good guys. They forget to teach you that Boston's the most segregated city in the country, for example. But I just remember being shocked to learn about that, well after high school.
Yeah, so indigenous people in the United States were not considered citizens until well into the 1920s.
Wow. That's yeah. It's wild, and also this unspoken thing in California wine. I don't think anybody's ever put it in these terms, right?
But I don't think that we tend to look closely at our own histories in the United States.
Yeah.
And there's aspects of this that in my research I found out that I didn't know too, right? I think both of you have said, like, it's written in a way that's not about damning anyone. I'm not in any way trying to project blame. I'm just saying, okay, let's look honestly at how we got here. You know, that's the name of the first section. How do we get here? Because that's the only, we have to know what's happened to understand why things are as they are.
Right. No, I mean, I think that it is, again, the frankness of it isn't damning. It's just, this is the fact, and then this is the next fact, and it makes it, you know, I think James and I were talking about this as in the back and forth that we've all had in the process. We're like, oh man, this shit's going to be heavy, and it is, but
not as heavy as you would think.
Not as you know, it's not as heavy as you know. It didn't weigh down on my white kilt as much as I thought.
As a writer and editor myself, like the best possible way to present that, where you're not turning anyone away. You're just saying, like, this is what it is, but let's keep going. Yeah. And there's no pointing of fingers, especially in a way that would turn a reader off. And I think that it's easy for a lesser writer to get bogged down in that. And I actually was really impressed with your ability to lay a groundwork, but then also kind of keep everyone along and moving forward.
No, thank you. And I mentor other writers and talk about writing in seminars and stuff like that. And one of the things that I realized is helpful for people when they're trying to figure out how to write a topic is just to ask the simple question, who am I talking to? You know, so like in grad school, if you're writing your thesis, it's like your cohort that you've studied with. Their voices are in your head pissing you off, but you're glad they're there because they're making
I'm going to show that guy up in the third row. Yeah.
But so then for a book like this, who was my audience? And I was actually, on the one hand, I wanted to write the book for a whole lot of people that have felt less included and yet actually are an integral part of the history of California wine and how we do things now. Right. But that was really important to me. But at the same time, I was like, well, and also I want to write to a skeptical audience that in a way that's like respectful, like it's appropriate to be skeptical. Right. And so I'll just tell you things that happen and you decide for yourself. Yeah. You know.
Well, I think taking away the veneer that wine often has of like elitism and non-inclusiveness and making it inclusive is a big step towards combating, you know, the issues that a lot of people are facing in the wine industry right now, where, you know, there's all this doom and gloom talk. And I think that a big part of that is people just don't feel a part of it, or they feel lesser than when they go in to talk about it. And I think that just laying out the facts and doing it in a way that anyone can understand and relate to is super important. And I think that there's a lot of wine brands that could take a lesson there, honestly.
Oh, thanks. For me, it's really important. Like, I can't ever feel like marketing. Yeah. You know, like it makes me want to die. So, and I'm not against marketing at all. It's actually crucial. I think we disparage marketing as if it's fake, when in actuality, we're all moving through the world with it all the time. So how about we just accept that too, you know?
Good marketing isn't fake.
Yeah. Well, and...
I would know.
You be quiet. You leave this to me.
Well, let's talk about the wine a little bit, because and actually the show that will come out right before this one, I'm going to Jay Bouchon, I remembered it, from Chile, and so they had we had a bunch of Pais, we had a bunch of Mission,
yeah, those are
100-year-old Mission vines, and there was one thing in here that I highlighted that was like the Mission grapes are only good when they're 100 years old or something that you wrote in there. So let's talk about a little bit about the wine, the grapes that were first grown, and sort of how that evolved. And it sort of leads into the second section of the book, is sort of, how it evolved and how, we've figured out what grows best where, which is also an evolving thing, but sort of also created the different regional aspects of the wines of California, right?
One of the things I think is really admirable about California is its willingness to try things. Like, I think if you're looking across the United States and thinking about, like, dynamic, creative, innovative, forward-thinking, while acknowledging history kind of place. It's like I can't think of one more that way than California as a whole, you know? And so, and that shows up in wine too. I talk about this some in the intro of the book, but...
Which was great also. Read the acknowledgments, because there's some of my best friends are in there, and myself, and read the intro. It's like must read the intro.
No, thank you. I always tell people, if you can't read the whole thing, just read the intro and the epilogue, and it's pretty awesome.
That may or may not have gotten me through a lot of things.
Can confirm.
I've written whole book reviews that way. Just kidding.
So of course,
Just kidding, Esquire.
As we know,
those guys don't read.
Whoa. I'm sorry, I just had to pause and recover from that last comment. I know we were supposed to let it get buried, but I can't, Okay, anyway.
No. It's all good. This is welcome to the Winemakers Podcast.
Wait, which comment?
Where trains of thoughts are meeting frequent derailment.
Just the you guys don't read thing.
Oh, no. We were joking. I was just making a dig at Esquire.
I'm trying to give James a chance to not get fired from anything. So anyway.
Oh, I quit there like 10 years ago.
I know.
I took everybody good with me. It's fine.
Okay. So we have like a listening clause that says that nobody's allowed to sue if you listen, that means no one can sue the podcast, right?
Absolutely. We do now.
His name is Ed.
He's the Podfather. You don't sue the Podfather. The Podfather sues you.
But if anybody needs John's number, let me know.
Okay, so the obvious history is just, the missionaries brought in what we call the mission grape. One of the things that's so cool is that there's, in the last decade especially, there was this rise of país in Chile, and it triggered, more recently, all these people in California being like, wait, that's the mission grape. We should do something with that. And so then all of a sudden there's been this rush of even planting newer vines.
Scribe has young mission.
Yeah, and they're actually down in Ballard Canyon in Santa Barbara County. There's some too. And a few other places. But one of the things that's really funny about that is the país coming out of Chile is from 100 to 200-year-old head-trained vineyards in the mountains on steep slopes. Like those vines have gone through it, And if you look at old records and also taste the young mission yourself, I think of it as like a cat tongue tannin, where it's like scratchy. And that doesn't mean it's bad, but when you get old mission, it's like silken and luscious while still relatively fine, thinner. So it's just, it's a great example of how some vines need a lot of time to grow.
Are there old mission grapes at Barisha? I know there are at Bedrock.
I mean, the Barisha block, for as far as I know, is pretty contiguously Zinfandel. But I'm sure in all those old vineyard blocks, Bedrock, Old Hill.
Bedrock definitely has a couple mixed in. They're crazy looking.
Usually it's the kind of thing where if the vineyard was planted like before 1910, roughly speaking, it probably is going to have at least a couple mission vines. But then, once Prohibition gets going, people start, if they're planting new vineyards, and, vineyard acreage in California doubled under Prohibition.
Which we need to talk about because that's fascinating.
So at that point, the new vines going in are the varieties we know survived the train over the mountain, and so a lot of Carignan goes in during Prohibition. And then once Prohibition ends, people aren't really planting that many new mixed vineyards, except that in the 1950s and into the 60s, it turns out if you placed an order with a nursery, you'd ask for either red or white. You'd get mixed blacks or mixed whites. And so it'd be a whole mess of stuff. But most of those didn't include mission. So anyway, the point being, the 1800s and early 1900s vineyards probably have at least one or two. Right. And that's true all over the state.
Well, those mission is a big buried variety. It was used for food as well as wine, right? Yeah.
It's the vines. I mean, like, if there's mission in that vineyard, because that shit is like as tall as your house, But,
well, that's what the guys from Jay Bouchon talking about. One of their bottlings, which is just the stuff
Yeah,
that they like climb up the trees to bring down.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that's
an awesome one.
that's a level of dedication and also occupational safety rules that we don't have in California.
So, I mean, sometimes we're so used to trained vines that we forget a vine winds around things. Like, in its natural state, a vine would grow up trees and create like a curtain along a river kind of thing. And so what happened at the Bouchon site in Chile was that there are these, over 100-year-old vines, but they were less tended for a short period of time. And so they put out tendrils and grew up the trees along the river. Right. And so at the right time of year, there's just this like curtain of grape clusters on the outside of these trees all along the river beside the vineyard. And so these crazy mofos get old school ladders out and climb that damn thing and get all the tree grapes. The tree grapes. And then do a bottling that's just that. Yeah. So they're like feral vines.
100%. And the wine is fantastic.
It's amazing. It's so good. Yeah. It's so good. It's smaller production because, of course, it's only grapes from trees.
Only the shit you can reach.
Yeah. But no, I really admire what Bouchon's doing, and that's a really cool example of like, let nature do its thing.
Yeah, totally.
But make it good.
Well, and I was talking to them about it. I mean, they do some amount of pruning of those vines so that they can, it's sort of
facilitates
make it, they go up to the highest ladder and prune down from there, so that, crops where they can reach it. I mean, there was some like organizing that chaos a little bit that makes it effective. But back to the wines of California, let's talk about some of the, that prohibition thing. Because, I always knew, or at least was, always told that the old vineyards of California didn't get pulled out at the beginning of Prohibition because grapes are great bootlegging fodder.
Yeah, but also like there was no money. You gotta remember,
right?
We're in the Great Depression. There's no money. Like people can barely afford to farm, right? And so eat what's there. We're gonna eat some grapes. Yeah, and Mission is a bigger berry, and there's more pulp in the middle,
right?
And so but by the time Prohibition hits, we have tons of mixed vineyards and mixed field vineyards, and we had started actually getting premium whites, like white-only vineyards, is not,
right,
not in the social sense,
right,
but like as in only white wine
less
grapes,
melanated varieties
of grapes, So we had like really top-notch Chardonnay, Semillon, at the time, and those. Only 2 or 3 of those vineyards survived Prohibition, but it was because the Wente family, their historic Chardonnay vineyards survived because they got a small contract to create. I think it was either I feel like it was actually medicinal wine, but it might have been sacramental. But the point is, they got a small license,
some stipend, some dispensation.
And they loved the Chardonnay vineyard that their grandparents had made, and so.
Which is the basis of California Chardonnay.
Well, and world Chardonnay, actually.
Right?
Like it's gone into Chile and Australia, all over the west coast of North America, and so and so they saved that. But anyway, the point being, no one pulled the vineyards that were established. The kind of finer berries were sold in San Francisco mainly because there was people often forget we're making tons of home wine here too, right?
My relatives, ancestors were making home wine in San Francisco in that time.
Yeah. And I mean some of the best home wine I've ever had was from a man that I'm certain used to be the longest tenured home winemaker in California. He just passed this last year, but Louis Abba Jr. He was out in Lodi, and
sounds like I might be related to him.
Man, he was fantastic. He just wonderful man, and I got to go out and sit with he and his brother and Louis' son and drink Louis' 73rd vintage of home wine from his family, Zinfandel. that he learned how to make home wine on from his dad and his grandpa,
right.
When he was like 8. But so yeah, we had a lot of home winemaking going on in California, and it was the expansion of vineyards. So again, vineyard acreage in California doubled during Prohibition. Yeah. But
that's such an amazing stat.
It's so wild, yeah. And it doubled. The new plantings were like really strong grapes, basically thicker skins.
Right.
And so what happened after Prohibition ended, we had to relearn how to make wine again, but also the vineyards we had were this melange of pretty tough grapes, and the only way to climb out of the impact of the Depression and Prohibition was through the cooperative system. So sometimes I think we disparage cooperatives, like the quality was less.
Right.
Anywhere in the world where they still exist, it's an economic necessity. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to support your farmers. And a cooperative is able to bring together enough resources to do that, right? Like they guarantee they will take their members' fruit and they will make something from it.
Right.
And there's still one cooperative that I've been able to find in the United States, in Maryland. And they work with a bunch of, it's like 75 growers in the southern half of Maryland. Some of the growing conditions down there are tough, like lots of water and humidity and stuff. Every single wine, I wish I could think of the cooperative's name, every single wine their winemaker makes is gold. And that's the power of the cooperative, right? You bring know-how, you pool resources to be able to afford a winery when one grower can't. Bring all the growers together so you have the material you need, and then make something good from it. And that really saved California's wine industry in the long run.
Will you dig in a little bit on the cooperative system, especially for those who didn't read that part of the book, and kind of how that worked and how it worked in California where that was happening? Because I know, sort of pre-Wine Institute and that, pre the Gallo family, it was sort of in that what led to the rise of those things, right?
Yeah. So Gallo and the California Wine Institute actually got started almost immediately after Prohibition, very quickly after, but they were really small scale, right? And so what happened when Prohibition ended, we had all these successful growers, but we had fully eradicated our winemakers. And now the market was different. Who were the growers supposed to sell all this fruit to? And they couldn't afford to replant because, again, Great Depression's going on. Right. And so this cooperative system develops where, in Napa, Sonoma, Lodi, San Joaquin Valley, all over the state, these like a leader will bring all these growers together, and it becomes a cooperative in the sense that the member growers, they all cooperate. They pool their grapes, their land resources together. They each put in, at that time, they would each put in a little bit of money, and that would help build the winery. Right. Sometimes it was that an outside person built the winery and then got people to join. But, just think about that. If you all only have a certain number of acres and you don't have a winery, if you've never made wine, it doesn't make any sense for you to scale up that quickly to suddenly add a winery, right? But if you and your neighbors get together and essentially hire a winemaker and all of your fruit is included somehow, then that becomes a cooperative model. So you have a centralized winery and grow as many growers as appropriate. Lodi had the largest kind of cooperative cohort. There were actually quite a number of cooperatives there, and they made millions and millions of gallons. And that was I think Lodi tends to be underregarded too, but their ability to grow and then problem solve through cooperatives really became the engine to restart California wine.
Is that a common process with other crops? I know in Vermont they do that with maple syrup and they have forever. Is that common with like other farm products or like artisanal products?
I mean, I think so. I think there's a lot of like dairies, although it's kind of dying in Sonoma and Napa County, but a lot of dairies that operated in that way, with the sort of like central creamery kind of thing and different farms supplying into it.
That's how, we had, no, unfortunately this is no longer true, but when I was growing up, we had local milk in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly how they did it. It was like one company was like, okay, look, we'll pasteurize, we'll bottle, we'll do all the stuff. Right. But there are all these.
You're right. Hood milk in Massachusetts. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
One day we need to talk more about dairies in Alaska because that sounds fun.
Unfortunately, there's not really much of that up there anymore.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
But yeah, ice cream everywhere.
A lot of cold Cas.
See myself out. Soft serve comes from.
So when does the cooperative system sort of fade in California? Is that as the sort of modern era begins with the Judgment of Paris?
No, it's before that. So it sort of phases out gradually. It doesn't all end at once. But then, so when World War II hits, it changes everything. Because before World War II, wine from California was put in tank car on the railroad to the East Coast and bottled there and sold as a merchant wine.
Right.
So no one even knew where it came from. No growers were getting acknowledged, right? Like they just knew merchant names. There weren't winery names. But then World War II hits and the United States government commandeers all of the tank cars because they need to be moving like oils and
fuel,
solvents and fuel and stuff like that for the war effort. So there's no ability to move wine in bulk to the East Coast anymore. So what happens is the wine industry becomes localized in California, and they have to problem solve. How do we sell wine? How do we, the biggest market is still the East Coast. How do we get it over there? So cooperatives start bottling on site. It's like the advent of bottling machines in California is not until World War II, basically. And but then at the same time, because everybody is now kind of thinking locally, you start having more individual wineries appearing. Not a lot more. There had been some since the 1800s, but the individual wineries that are around suddenly realize they want to bottle their own stuff. So they start bottling on site, and then what happens in that time period is suddenly this new market concept, bottled at the winery, starts to appear on wine labels. And that becomes the cue to consumers that this is a good quality wine. So people start looking for what essentially then becomes a state wine.
Right.
And it helps changes the market. But the other thing that happens because of that is that now that we're doing it on site and we don't have to put it all in one big tank car or 10 big tank cars, suddenly people are like, oh shit, this one is really good. This tank, whew. And so people start for the first time also bottling comparatively smaller lots. And that's the slow beginning towards what we have now with these smaller bottling, still big bulk ones, and everything in between. It takes hold during World War II because all the resources change. The other thing from that time period, though, is that all the distilleries in the United States are also commandeered by the United States government to create industrial level solvents, and so suddenly all of the whiskey distilleries, all the bourbon distilleries are not making alcohol anymore. They're still making money because they're on contract with the government to make solvents, but they have this whole team of salesmen who are too old to go to war, but are longstanding in the company, and nobody knows how long the war's going to go on, and those salesmen can't go to Europe to sell stuff anymore.
Right.
So the distilleries start buying up California vineyards, including cooperatives. And they, interestingly, that helps start the shift with cooperatives. But also, the distilleries had a marketing acumen that had not existed in the state of California because we were all too small scale. And so the distilleries start doing big full-page newspaper ads. When magazines are an option, they have splash glossy magazine ads. And then eventually they start doing radio spots and then later television ads, and they're all like mini movies.
Right.
And so even though they were marketing their own specific wine, the takeaway was California makes wine, and it helped grow the whole interest in the industry here.
I mean, I feel like this is sort of this theme that comes through this, the California history of the way the California industry adjusts to outside geopolitical forces, essentially, right? And it happens
over and over,
time and time and time, and maybe it's basically like a 20-year cycle.
Yeah, and because so now World War II shifts how we have to do things, but it also gets us out of the Depression, and it creates this new generation where all of a sudden the Great Generation, as they were called, they all are, like, come back comfortable from the war and start having tons of babies. Right. There's a baby boom.
Right.
The children of the baby boom grow up in a brand new American middle class that hadn't existed before. And they're used to eating together and trying the brand new emerging American Italian restaurants and the new emerging French restaurants, because these are considered fine dining. And wine now becomes a staple of what we call the boomer generation, because they're just raised in it in a way that their parents weren't.
Right. It's fascinating. It's just the cycles, the cyclical nature of it all is what I kept coming to as I was reading voraciously, skimming voraciously.
History repeats itself is not just a catchphrase.
Yeah.
As evidenced by things we don't want to talk about right now.
My dad, though, he really loved history, and he always, there's that classic thing that those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it, and that it's like, we got...
you could also look at the opposite of that and say that there's a lot of people who did study history and are using that to repeat it.
Yeah, so. That's true too. But I feel like they can get away with that because the rest of us don't keep up with history. But anyway,
I don't know. I feel like the more we keep up, the more you realize that it's all happening over again. And
oh my God! And here, let's start that conversation all over again too.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep snooping.
Well, let's talk about sort of when. And get into the second section a little bit of when does the regionality of California wine start to take place? When do both from a consumer standpoint, but also from the production standpoint, when do people start thinking about it in the terms that we have now of, and the way that you break that second section of the book out to the different growing regions of California?
Yeah. So in terms of consumers thinking about regions of California for wine doesn't start until like the 70s, It was there locally in some extent, so the first great region of wine in California was around the LA Basin.
Right.
And
that was in the 1800s, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the LA Basin is the dominant center of wine, until the late 1800s. And then in the 1880s or early 1890s, I don't recall which, the whole area gets hit with Pierce's disease. They didn't know that's what it was at the time. But it decimates vineyards through Southern California, and they decide, well, shoot, down here we can grow all kinds of stuff. So the whole industry shifts to citrus fruits, and very few vines remain. But by the time Pierce's disease hits the LA Basin, people had already started moving to growing vineyards in Sonoma. So that, the upside of the gold rush is, people move to Northern California, and they start growing vineyards up here. So then when Pierce's disease takes out LA, people had already sorted out, oh God, Sonoma makes really good wine. So Sonoma was really the first great Northern California growing region, and Sonoma actually gave the first vines to Napa Valley.
I'm going to keep digging for a minute. By the way, Pierce's disease and the glassy wing sharpshooter is something that we still are dealing with and are super aware of when it comes to, Southern California versus Northern California. So, another one of the things in here that 150 years later.
I don't belabor that one, though. I just happened to mention.
Right, just mention, as something that I'm acutely aware of is the Pierce's disease. So the first kind of step into thinking regionally comes with
Frank Schumacher, in the again World War II. He's a wine broker in the East Coast and can't get his wines from Europe anymore. So and he's like, but that's okay. Surely the U.S. makes good wine. So he starts traveling all over the U.S., finds really great wine. In again Missouri, New York, Ohio. Comes to the West Coast, finds.
Do we know what those grapes were? What they were growing?
Norton from
Norton,
Missouri,
yeah.
right? And I think it was Catawba in Ohio, but I actually have his original American catalog. Yeah, I'm very proud of this. I'm like getting chills just saying I have it at home. So I could look, but
and what the prices were.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that, but. I could actually sell it and get a few really good bottles of wine.
Yeah.
This little pamphlet.
But then when you drink them, they're gone.
I know. Right now, I still have the pamphlet. So.
And do you lack for really good bottles of wine?
No, it's fine. But anyway, he comes to California, finds some of the stalwart California wineries, and the thing he does that had never been done before was he puts winery name, because again, remember, it was all merchant wines.
Right.
He puts the winery name, the place it's from, and the variety name. And so, forgive the geekery, but in 1928, Alsace was the first region in the world to put variety on the label. But it became a global phenomenon when California started doing it in the 1930s. And Schumacher was not the first. Martin Ray was also doing it. Wente started doing it, and Schumacher was doing it. And so that's the first time consumers start thinking in terms of Zinfandel rather than a mixed red. And then eventually that turns into Chardonnay rather than a regional white, and also Cabernet. And so before California labeled those by variety, they were only ever known in the world through a region or a fanciful name. So that kind of starts the regional thing. But then what happens is by the 1970s, people were starting to look for wine in California. Paris tasting, of course, had happened, and California ostensibly won. And so in the 1970s, people start looking for wine in California. A lot of people move into California and start growing vineyards. And that's when then we start thinking of sub-areas of California. But it takes a while.
Right. And I know it was in there. What was the first AVA? In
California, it was Napa Valley.
It was Napa Valley.
Yeah. But we're not the first in the country.
Do you want to hop on the mic, Bart? Bart made it in.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi, great to see you.
From Special Assignment.
Yeah, special assignment teenage boys.
Special teenage assignments.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
It was not on my bingo card on
to have
raising
teenage
a child.
boys.
No, on raising a child, that what we're dealing with is what is going to come up. Anyway, it's not about that. I got to peek at the book a little bit. I can't wait to dive into it.
No, thank you.
It's and so thank you for doing it. History of California, wine has come full circle for me because of this place where I'm holding my tastings now. And so I've been trying to piece together as much. From what I've seen in the book, I've already have to change a couple of my stories I like to share, and I have a whole bunch more to tell. So thank you.
That's so cool. I love that too. Just like, when we, like the building that we're in right now at 16600 is another great example, right? There's a whole history. And I just feel like, with your taste room, there's a whole history. And it's like, whenever I learn those things, I feel more connected to where we live,
I mean, it's amazing. There's this series of books out there. It's like the historical postcard history of Sonoma Valley.
Yeah, with the little like brown framing. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it's amazing what you can get out of that. And there's a local quote unquote historian in Glen Ellen that put together a lot of information about the Chevet winery, then being the Pagani winery. So it's been awesome, and so I'm really looking forward to really diving into the book.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Anyway, you guys are on something. Keep going.
I don't know where we are.
What are you on, Sam?
What are we on? The usuals. The usuals are good. Coffee for sure.
Elaine, how long have you been working on this?
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
Your whole life. Well, your whole recent life.
An artist friend of mine was 36 at the time she told me this story, and she was a professional artist and had that her Bachelor of Fine Arts was in that and everything. And she said that people would ask, "My God, how long did it take you to make this painting?" And she would say 36 years. Yeah. But there's a sense in which that's definitely true. It's like a lot of the perspective that I bring to being able to write the book is because I'm, 162 years old. And,
but
you don't look a day over 135.
Thank you.
But I don't think anybody else could have written this book because of your perspective of your family's background and which gives you the interest in it, right? Like someone could have, but I don't know. I feel somehow your connection in your growing up lends itself to telling this story's been told. Again, I've only seen little bits of it, but this story's been told, but there's been a lot of stuff left out that I think is coming to light now.
No, thanks. I made a conscious choice to not, the history of California wine has been brilliantly written already. Charles Sullivan and Thomas Finney are like two of the main people that have done an incredible amount of work on that. And I was like, want to reiterate what they've already done, because somebody can go read that, and they should. Those books are brilliant. And so I decided instead to take the major moments of California wine history and put it in a larger context, like a national and a global context. And in terms of my background, one of the things I realized was part of why I ended up in wine in the way that I am is because I grew up commercial fishing for salmon in Alaska. It's a harvest industry. I was, we had 5 generations commercial fishing. I was the 4th. I learned from my great-grandfather and then helped my nieces and my kid learn. Yeah. And my nieces and nephews still fish today on the same sites that my great-grandparents started. So it's like the wine industry is harvest industry. You can't control when the grapes come in. You have to get them in. You're probably with your family. They're probably a pain in the ass too. It's like there's so many parallels. And so when I got into wine, I started intentionally learning from the people doing it rather than a lot of writers learned sort of from the market, which I think is important. But because of my background, it didn't occur to me to learn in any other way except going to the vineyard workers, going to the viticulturists, going to the winemakers.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, let's talk about the third section a little bit and sort of some of the lessons that you saw California wine learn through its history that we can apply to our existential threats and our future, and how we can continue to sort of keep pushing that cutting edge of innovation that we always have.
Yeah. Well, one of the big things, of course, everybody's worried about these days is climate change. Whether you believe humans did it or not, people are still worried about it. I had a really great conversation with a man in Australia who was driving me to the airport, so I had to get along with him.
At least for 25 minutes or so?
Well, no, it was an hour and a half. And he was explaining to me how climate change wasn't human-caused, and there was our proximity to the sun and the angle of the planet and everything played a role, which is fine. Okay, fine. But because the point of the story is that he was still concerned about the impacts of climate change. So anyway, one of the things that was really interesting in digging further into those kinds of questions was I actually, this tells you what a dork I am, but I accidentally started researching the Dust Bowl because I was researching California wine. Oklahoma, obvious, right?
Yeah, there's some. I mentioned those people all showed up here and were vineyard workers for a while, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. So anyway, the Dust Bowl was one of the greatest ecological disasters in U.S. history, and it was almost entirely man-made.
Right.
And it was what we had to do to solve that was the U.S. government had to invest in bringing problem solvers in, and they did that at multiple levels. But one of the, so they reclaimed land and put it in national parks and national monuments so that it can't be farmed or couldn't have been farmed until maybe recently. And then, but the
mostly extracted. I don't think they'll be doing much farming.
The other piece of that, though, was they brought in basically a professional farmer who spent time examining the landscape to problem solve how to farm in a way so that you could preserve farming, but also strengthen the landscape. And a lot of it was that, everybody, during the Dust Bowl, everybody was just farming flat, regardless of the surface area. And he came in and he realized that they needed to farm, not in terraces, but basically in loops around land formations, because that would allow the land to capture more water. And if it captured more water, that would lessen the dust, right, which would reduce what could blow through on a windy day. And so just things like that, I think that's a period we're in now. There's so much to learn from history of our farming and the problem solving, but also, like the farm workers taught us about how pesticides can actually create ecological disaster too. And, things like that. Our history has plenty to teach us.
Just out of curiosity, with the Dust Bowl, was it broadly acknowledged that was caused by us over farming, or was there like a cultural pushback, much like there is with climate?
There was some of both, because there was this argument that, it was the drought. And there was a drought, but interestingly, we now know that actually the drought was extended and exacerbated by the farming, which is something that we're seeing going on here in California and a lot of places now. So certain types of farming actually create drier environments, which then prolongs a drought. And we're experiencing things like that in California. And so there was some resistance, but the Dust Bowl was so severe that they would get dust from the dust storms inside the White House in Washington, D.C., which is why the government then invested in helping to solve it.
There's a note here somewhere, but we shouldn't say it on air.
That deserves a
ding. We've had some good dings. You had a glass, didn't you? James took it. James took your glass. All right.
I'm not pointing any fingers. You all might, but that's up to you.
It's a radio show. You can't tell where we're pointing fingers. You can't tell who just walked in the room.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
Speaking about the history of viticulture.
Right?
Well, and Mr. Phil Couturi appears in the book a few times.
I do?
Yeah.
Well, sit down in front of a microphone.
This guy.
I talk about your childhood. Hope you don't mind. Based on stories you've told me, I don't know if you remember them, but
right. Does he remember telling them, or does he remember that they happened?
I don't remember anything.
Get in the microphone. Get in the microphone.
I don't remember anything, but it's probably all true. I'm sure it is.
No, I'm very proud of having you in the book, because I'm trying to. So I have a book on wines of California coming out, and I'm trying to tell some of the stories that are lesser known, but really helped shape the industry in the state. And so I think it's chapter 4 of the history section, part of this story of the growth of vineyards in California and the move towards organics. You're part of that story.
Oh, great. I look forward to reading it to see what I said. You didn't by chance mention Joe Miami at all, did you?
No, I don't think so. No, I have a section on Bob Kennard.
Oh, good.
And on Amigo Bob.
Great.
Yeah, and I talk about Prudy Fox down in Santa Cruz County.
Right.
And
it's really good.
Yeah.
Ruben Solorzano down in Santa Barbara County.
Good. Great. Well, Bob Kennard, as his total absence of passion when it comes to great wine.
well published disdain for the Vitis vinifera.
Yeah, was really instrumental in my transition of going 100% organic in the 70s.
Yeah.
When I met him. And and as a person that doesn't believe in certification, but is very passionate about how to deal with the soils, and his whole ideas on how to cultivate and when to cultivate and stuff like that were really instrumental. And we had to look at going from farming vegetables to how to apply this to viticulture, because there was no roadmap to doing that type of farming when I started in the 70s.
Yeah, so I talk about that. I've been lucky enough to sit down with you a few times and just kind of ask you to talk as long as I can keep you, basically, while I take notes.
Well, keep me talking in a linear fashion.
Well, I don't need linear. Yeah. I can keep up with loops. It turns out we've covered that already. Yeah.
Well, a long time ago, I was laying on my back looking at a redwood tree as it spiraled up, and I really realized that's how I think.
Yeah.
What were you doing lying under that redwood tree?
Well, I was conversing with the universe. One of those rites of maturation.
Yeah.
So, no, I look forward to reading the book.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Comes out in
April 14th.
April 14th. James's mom's birthday. Cindy Joyner Day.
Good. Is any of your photos in there?
No, but my name is.
For what?
Being rad.
Right. For laughing at the memes that Elaine sends us late at night while she's writing in the book and getting.
Laughing at the memes we send.
Yeah, even better.
I've
seen nervous breakdown.
Was it really James Joyner, or was just the word James and then
Later,
You joined them together.
We might see a lot of this.
But, I think it is really good because there is we were really, I was really fortunate to live through the transitions in viticulture from everything was 8 by 12 and you had your Winkler in one hand and the biggest tractor you could get in the other to move California viticulture ahead. And as we moved it ahead, it also, even though a lot of this influence did come from Europe, we brought a lot back to Europe too.
Well, and I talk about that in the book too, especially in the introduction, just that, I think sometimes people assume so-called New World wine is only ever derivative of Europe. But California is a great example of how, okay, we might still have the same varieties, but when you bring them here, they become a whole new phenomenon that then reinvigorates where they came from. And there's lots of examples of that.
Because the one thing that is always amazes viticulturists coming from the old world is our soils and our vigor, and how our vines are responding and their vines didn't respond. But I'm looking forward to seeing. And it's good to see that transition being explored.
Cool.
All right, well, April 14th, book's out, but you can go online and order it ahead of time, right?
Yeah, so it's available for pre-order now. Académie du Vin, the publisher, has it on their website.
Right.
But
go there and not that other place to buy books
online. Yeah, but the
online.
other places do have it. So if you just search Wines of California, Elaine Chukan Brown, or Chuckavaka.
Chuckavaka.
Preferred name, but
that's a deep inside joke.
Yeah, but if you search some combination of Wines of California, Chukan, or something like that, it'll come up and
it'll be in the podcast notes.
You actually
also buy it at your local bookstore.
My favorite, exactly. My favorite thing would be walk into your local bookstore and say, I want Wines of California by Chuckavaka, and they won't know. They will not know what you're saying. But if you say Wines of California, Chuckavaka, they'll say, oh, there's one by Elaine Chukan Brown. You go, oh yeah, that's the one.
That's how you say her name.
And at Point Reyes Books, and they both found it.
Okay, good.
Fantastic. Yeah, so go into your local place. They can absolutely find it. And if you pre-order through them, you'll be keeping your local economy going and also getting the book in front of other people near you.
Yeah. Also, if you're on Goodreads, as much as Amazon is the worst, say nice things, because that is very important to our authors.
Goodreads.
And it's supporting readers' books is most. Maybe you should do a reading there of it.
I would actually really love to.
We should talk to him.
We'll talk to them.
I'm feeling shy about it because I don't know.
Because I know people that would supply wine for it.
Oh my!
I spend a lot of money and time.
Maybe
I can go over it. I'll bring it up.
I'd like to do a reading of Phil Couturi's history while we drink his wine.
So would that be like in a courtroom?
A waiting room.
I actually made a point of editing the book to avoid any illegal activities being mentioned.
All the terrible things that you mentioned were all legal at the time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Are they legal now?
No, they were legal then. They're mostly illegal now. Although times they are changing.
This morning on Wordles.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is great. Anything else? What was the most surprising thing that you came across that you weren't expecting researching this book?
God, I don't know. There's so many things.
You
don't
have to say just one.
I honestly think one of the things we've talked about already is just how readily we repeat our own problems. Yeah. And but we and then get mad that we're suffering through them when we created them ourselves. Right. And again, the labor issue is just the prime example of we keep creating our own labor shortage and then being mad that those people don't want to work when we're the ones that set up the situation. So that was actually, I kind of had a sense of that already, but it was really striking to see it again and again and again.
Yeah, it jumps out.
Yeah, the thing I'm proud of though is I feature people that have changed the face of California wine that aren't always on stage, or they're not always in the big books, and I'm really proud of that. And especially making sure that viticulturists that help bring organics into the state, I try to make sure there's at least someone from each region that's featured for that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, looking forward to keep digging in on it. It's great bedtime reading.
Intro, epilogue.
Intro, epilogue.
Yeah.
Any shout outs?
Well, I just want,
Right.
James and Sam, you're both in the acknowledgments, and it's not just because you send me ridiculous memes. It's although there's that. It's also just because every time I've seen you, if I was stressed out about the book, or I just was stressed out because I'm myself, I wasn't worried about what you two would think of that, And,
We're all just laughing our way into the abyss.
Yeah,
well,
totally.
I mean that might sound like a really simple thing, but it's actually a pretty big thing, and can be hard to find that. So thank you.
Yeah, you were in deep writing this book. We could tell, and we're glad to see you on the other side.
I'm still recovering.
Yeah, fair. Bart, you got anything?
No, I'm looking forward to getting into the book more, and I think I've said thanks for doing it enough, so leave it at that.
Fair. Lots of events going on. They're all available. You can find them somewhere. But I do want to give a shout out to the Seychelle family. Peter Seychelle, at 102.
Or was it 104?
It was 102 in the headline, 104 in the article. Right. Apparently, the Wine Spectator has some continuity issues.
Well, talk about a person that changed the world.
Changed the world
But,
in lots of ways.
In lots of ways.
In lots of ways.
Behind the scenes, we're alive thanks partially to him, but
Right.
also the world of wine was hugely expanded because of him.
Totally. And one of my favorite episodes that we ever did was with Bettina telling his story. So I don't know, that was 5 years ago or 6 years ago. So you can go back in deep in the archives. And we'll it's a good idea.
Well, so his daughter Bettina is right here, Sonoma.
Right, Laurel Glen.
Yeah, and Laurel Glen, awesome wines, historic as well.
Right.
And also Phil's been part of that. So
Right.
yeah.
The first vineyard he worked in.
Yeah, well, it was right behind the probably our folk spot.
Yeah.
Just sort of fell into it, and Patrick Campbell did a spectacular job with that, and again, he marched to the beat of his own drummer because he did things that were totally unheard of on a vineyard like that, but pulled it off. He made good wine too.
Yeah. So
Really good wines. I was able to interview him, 10 years ago or something. I feel really fortunate for that.
all right, well I think that's all we got.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, this the first official interview.
Let me point out, this is the first official interview. You've heard about the book from here.
Right. We got the scoop, Bart.
If you don't like the book, you can tell off Sam and
Any complaints at Sam at 1866.
Jasmine will respond to you.
And Sam will never know.
No, I'll have no idea. Right. Great. Well, thanks for listening. Thank you, Elaine. Subscribe, review.
Read more books.
Read more books. Tell your friends, but only the cool ones.